What's up, DS3 TV? We are back for another video. This one is the fall of the Byzantine Empire, and yeah, so this is going to be a really good video, and it's by Overly Sarcastic Productions. We love this channel on DS3 TV, and yeah, so let's look at the fall of Rome, at the fall of the Byzantine Empire, and also subscribe to the channel. I want to get 1,000 subscribers by Valentine's Day. But I have a smaller goal of 500 subscribers by January 14th. So let's get to that. And also thank you guys for 340 subscribers. That is amazing and insane. And yeah, so let's get into the video and play.
In the West was getting gobsmacked into oblivion in 476 AD, the eastern half of the empire, with its capital of Constantinople, was, by comparison, doing pretty great. For one, they existed, so that's a plus, and the Byzantine Empire evolved into a gorgeous gold-coated hybrid of classical Greco-Roman and medieval Christian culture. But unfortunately for our biz boys, shiny mosaics and ginormous domes couldn't prevent the infinite abyss of disasters that lay in wait over the millennium to come. Between Persians, Goths, Arabs, Turks, Normans, and the more than occasional civil war, it's safe to say that the Byzantines could not catch a break. And the latter medieval period continues this distinctly Promethean trend, where they suffer a constant and arduous evisceration by eagle without ever actually dying from it. As we will indeed see in just a moment, our favorite golden disaster empire managed to keep on thriving and defying the specter of death despite even the most garbage of circumstances. So, to see how the Byzantine Empire procrastinated its own death and, even then, kind of slipped past the deadline, let's do some history. Now, this video's timeline will start, incidentally, with the fall of the empire, about 2 centuries ahead of the typical 1453. I know, we're making great time, because long before the Ottomans ever enter the picture, the Byzantines were struggling to coexist with the Italian merchant empires they were growing so reliant on. Venetian and Genoese traders tussled in the Latin neighborhoods of Constantinople like they were street gangs in Shakespearean Verona, but the Byzantines poured the proverbial Greek fire on the problem by arresting and then murdering tens of thousands of Latin citizens in the city. Bad look. This giant yikes was compounded by the baffling ineptitude of the ruling Angelus dynasty, whose constant infighting left the empire woefully mismanaged. This got infinitely worse when the powers of Europe launched Crusade numero 4 on the promise of, this time it might actually work.
It doesn't. I'm about to say, yeah, they had a lot of crusades that really were failed crusades.
The ensuing surprise of precisely nobody, it got off to a rocky start, with their understaffed army getting excommunicated by the Pope before they even left the Adriatic Sea. But the light at the end of the Crusaders' tunnel was Prince Alexios Angelos, who offered Byzantine military support in exchange for reinstating his deposed father. So here we see the Angeloi ignoring the key rules from Alexios Komnenos' declassified crusading survival guide. Rule 1. Under any circumstances, do not ask crusaders for help. We've been through this before. It is not worth it. Rule 2. If the Crusaders arrive anyway, transport your Crusaders across your empire as fast as humanly possible. Do not let them get any ideas. Rule 3. While your Crusaders are inside your empire, never, under any circumstances, provoke your Crusaders. They are armed, violent, and prone to fits of disproportionate rage. Yet, in 1204, the Angeloi failed spectacularly on every point, and spying an opportunity to quit while they were ahead, the Crusaders simply sacked Constantinople. Venice deliberately instigated the pillaging, but by this point the Byzantines really should have known better than to tee them up. So, the sack. Beyond being a rough approximation of literal hell on earth for the Byzantines unfortunate enough to be on the receiving end, the Crusaders desolated the art and architecture of the city. Venetians had the good sense to steal the priceless relics of Constantinople for the glory of the Republic, instead of mindlessly burning and or murdering everything and or one. But whether trashed or taken, Constantinople still ended up ruined, and the rest of the empire was next on the to thieve list. Venice, the crafty little devils, chose to swipe off the islands of the Aegean, while the Franks installed a Latin emperor on the Byzantine throne and carved up the Greek mainland. On paper, the Byzantine Empire ends right here. The capital was now kaput, and the Aegean basin, which so long preserved the Greco-Roman world, went poof. But even the end of the empire couldn't shake that damn Hellenic persistence, as Byzantine nobles in survival mode quickly laid out successor states in the wake of the Crusade, in Trebizond, Nicaea, and Epirus. Each became a haven for Greeks fleeing their new Frankish overlords in mainland Greece, whose Latin empire proved to be little more than a post-Crusade money pot. But the Franks quickly got bored by the prospect of actually governing and soon became weaker than the assorted Byzantines they had so recently stomped. Are we really surprised? The The three Hellenic states started out on the defensive, to put it mildly, but some shifty strategy and good old-fashioned luck gave Nicaea a leg up. After spreading out over the western Anatolian coast and gaining a foothold in Thrace and Macedonia, the Nicaeans reconquered Constantinople kind of by accident. While a small army scouted around the city to suss out its defenses, they learned that the Frankish army was out on campaign. So the Byzantines snuck through a small break in the wall, opened a gate, and then took the city. For all the disasters to befall the Byzantines, it's only fair that the RNG just this once works out in their favor. Though Emperor Michael Palaiologos soon found his work cut out for him, as the city had hardly been clean since the crusade half a century earlier, and sliding so close to death's door prevented the Byzantines from cutting quite as imperial a figure as they used to. Still, it was better than the alternative. As we've seen, it was hard enough to defend the Byzantine dominion back in the good old days, but with the emperor now presiding over a kingdom and a capital that were both hollow shells of their former selves, clever diplomacy was the sharpest weapon in the arsenal. Fair to say the more impressive achievement was not in retaking Constantinople, but in keeping it. As ever, the rivalry between Venice and Genoa made this difficult, as their schoolyard slap fight had a conspicuous habit of always going down in Constantinople. And, of course, there were a few strategic flubs, such as when the Byzantines hired a band of Catalan mercenaries who went rogue at the slightest provocation and claimed the Duchy of Athens for the next 7 decades. But even this wasn't the worst mercenary customer experience the Byzantines would endure, as, in 1343, the royal treasury was too thin to pay for Venetian help, so the former Empress Anna pawned what she had, which was the empire's crown jewels. So, despite selling Constantinople's royal honor for some warships, Anna lost her war, which, I should say, was a civil war against the Empire. So, when acting Emperor John Cantacuzene and his wife Irene were officially coronated in 1347, the crowns were copies made of tinted glass, because the originals were off in Venice, like every other Byzantine artifact. Yet, somehow, despite all that, hardly the worst thing to happen in the 1340s, because, as we know, plague. Man, it does not let up. Population is ravaged, economy in ruins, let us not dally here, friends, we all know the drill, and this would provide a golden opportunity for the Ottomans over in Anatolia, who quickly made it clear they were the next big Muslim power. So, about a century after the reconquest of Constantinople, there were 4 fundamental and unavoidable problems to the empire's long-term health. The Ottomans were gaining strength and pushing west, Venice and Genoa turned the Aegean into their personal battlefield, and the complete lack of a Byzantine economy meant they were fully dependent on those two for trade. Then, to cap it off, we've got the endless internal powers.
There is an ever-shifting balance of whether Constantinople is the center of the world, the edge of it, or the wrestling pit for everyone else. Having lost its maritime crest to the Italian merchant states, the Aegean was no longer a Byzantine sea. The constant infighting didn't help. It seems like it did. It seems like it would not have helped.
Struggles and succession crises. Let's not kid ourselves, this is still the Romans we're talking about here. With worries like that, fully rebuilding the empire was a no-go, so the Byzantines picked their battles and bought their time, which meant putting themselves under the protection of the Ottomans. But, ever defiant in the face of peril, giving up was never an option. While the empire was shrinking down to just Constantinople, things looked shockingly different on the other side of the Aegean. Right when Michael Palaiologos was tripping ass first into retaking Constantinople in 1261, he also had the good fortune of capturing the Latin prince of Achaia in a battle, and ransomed him back in exchange for a few castles down in the Peloponnese. They weren't much, but they were well fortified among the mountains, much like the ancient Spartans had been way back when. Over the next 2 centuries, this distant Byzantine outpost in Laconia became a prosperous corner of the Hellenic world, as Greeks from the Morea and beyond flocked into the city of Mistras to try.
The etymology of Moria is vague, possibly referring to the type of tree from the area the name only came into fashion in the medieval period. Previously, Peloponnese was used. Okay.
And pick up where the empire left off. So in the 13 and 1400s, Mistras became a haven of Byzantine culture and scholarship. And I mean, look, I'm not gonna pretend like one decently well-off corner of the Greek world is just on par with the empire pre-Crusade, because of course it's not. But I will come to bat for the Morea as a paragon of that Romano-Hellenic perseverance, to keep on trying even after everything seemed lost. No, I'm not getting sentimental, that's just marble dust in my eyes, shut up. Anyway. Like with Constantinople, keeping this territory safe required a gentle diplomatic touch, but the game was a hell of a lot easier with water on 3 sides and mountains on the 4th. And with Constantinople sweating javelins at the sight of incoming Ottomans, it became clear that the Morea could handle itself, so it gained autonomy in 1349. By the early 1400s, they expanded outside Laconia into almost the entire Peloponnese and briefly had authority over Attica. The Byzantine Morea also had a practical benefit to Constantinople, as emperors in waiting got their political training as governors down in the Peloponnese, to the point where the last emperor, Constantine XI, was actually crowned in Mistras rather than up in the capital. Uh-oh, did I say last? Yeah, about that. The thing with the Ottomans is they didn't stop. Despite the Empire's best efforts and the too little too late help of European Crusader armies that disintegrated on impact, it was clear the show was wrapping up. By 1453, Sultan Mehmet finally had the means to take the city of Constantinople, and by means, I mean cannons the size of a house. After blockading the Bosphorus and cutting off the city's line of supply, the Ottomans blasted open the Theodosian walls and poured in. Emperor Constantine is said to have given a rousing speech to his countrymen before charging into where the fighting was fiercest, never to be.
The speech was surely invented afterwards, so there's a good pathos. You know well, my brothers, that we have 4 obligations for which we are willing to die: our faith, our pity, and our homeland, our families, and the emperor anointed by the Lord. We fight not for just one obligation, but under the command of all 4.
Be seen again. After the battle, the Sultan toured the city and was so awed by the beauty of Hagia Sophia that he preserved it and converted it into a mosque, rather than blasting it and starting from scratch, as was more often the move. But even after this, he said, moving the goalpost back for dramatic effect, it wasn't the end for the Byzantines. For one, the Ottomans continued the time-honored love of ultra-domed architecture, but also the Venetian Republic's outlying territories in the Aegean and Ionian Seas were majority Greek, further preserving Hellenic culture for centuries. Venetian Crete later became a beacon for art and scholarship that mixed the Italian Renaissance with traditional Hellenism. So despite the earth-shattering treachery of crusading Venetians, the painfully ironic end result is that Venice played a vital part in the long-term preservation of Byzantine culture. Man, that is uncomfortable to say out loud. And though Crete fell to the Ottomans in 1669, nice, the Ionian Islands remained stubbornly non-Ottoman until they became part of modern Greece, but that is really pushing the timeline, so let's wrap up. The standard question of the Byzantine Empire is essentially, why didn't they die way the hell sooner when everything was always on fire? Because, on one level, yeah, the Byzantine story is over 1,000 straight years of the map getting smaller, but that time-lapse would have been swift if they didn't persevere. Let's not forget they had over 1,000 years. By some metrics, that's the longest empire, and it got that far because at no point in Byzantine history was it too late to care, or too late to try, because they believed that they had something about their state, their people, their faith, and their identity that was worth living for and dying for. And even when the last mini-golden age was a distant memory, that tireless determination to do their best kept them going in even the most dire circumstances to create the next mini-golden age. So when we look back at the empire to ask why the Byzantines kept going after Rome falls in 476, it's for the same reason as when Constantinople fell in 1204, but those Byzantines kept going. Thank you so much for watching.
That is a very inspiring story, but yeah. So talk to you guys in the next video. Subscribe to the channel. Want to get 500 subscribers by January 14th. And yeah, talk to you guys in the next video. Peace.